Okay, well, we're not quite going live yet, but I think on YouTube it started live. So welcome all those who are watching on live stream, and it's great to be with all you guys who are here on Zoom. I'm just going to go into my next session in a minute when everything's ready technically to get going. But I just want to say how much I appreciate, how you've created an atmosphere that's been open and has allowed us to share. Obviously, these conferences right from the beginning tackle very difficult subjects, and a lot of the difficult subjects around what happens to people after they die, what happens to fallen angels, dimensional realities, they're all out there stuff. And I know it triggers a lot of people, and people have, they make judgments around all of that, and people are entitled to their own view and opinion. And I've got no issue with people having a different view. The problem lies where it then starts to trigger emotions, that then it becomes conflict. And, I feel that I want to make a statement around some of the issues to just get it on record of where I'm coming from personally. I mean, I'm writing a book at the moment called The Eschatology, the Restoration of All Things, in which I go into what the deceptions are that are leading us away from God's purposes into another purpose. And I talk a lot about eschatology. I also talk about the hoodwinking of history. And I'm talking about ancient history and modern history. And what I was taught in the history books, as I engaged the Father, he began to show me that some of the things that I were taught was true weren't true, or they were twisted truth or partial truth, or that there was a lot of deception trying to hide the truth. And of course, the history books are written by those who usually win the wars, so they're not necessarily going to be objective. It's a lot of subjective stuff, and a lot of it is definitely written from the perspective to show those who won the war in the best possible light. That's always going to be the case. So we need discernment whenever we look at anything. And so I've been looking at history and looking at, well, what has been the agenda of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and what was behind that, which I would call a Luciferian agenda, for want of a better word, and how that has used the religious and political spirit right throughout history to maintain an anti-God world system. Because that's the whole purpose of that, is to create a system where Lucifer is God, even though people obviously wouldn't necessarily believe that. But any humanistic system is backed by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is backed by that Luciferian agenda. So Lucifer was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. And that's what Jesus called those who followed that at their day, which in a sense they were obviously following the Judaistic religion, but actually they were hoodwinked into following something which was behind that. And he challenged them. Your father is of the devil, because you're not following me, you're following a religious system. So every religious system, no matter what it is, including Christianity, if you boil it down to a religious system, is actually anti-God. Christianity is actually anti-Christ if you boil it down to a religious system and actually take the relationship out of it, and it becomes a set of laws. And evangelicalism has created a set of laws for Christianity in the last couple of 100 years or so, which a lot of people have bought into. And therefore, when you begin to challenge eschatology, which was at the root of evangelicalism, you then get challenged yourself and called a heretic and everything else. Now, Jesus also said that you can't serve God and mammon. Now, we often associate mammon with money because that's the front of the mammonian system, if you like, or the system which comes out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And ultimately, of course we can't. It is not consistent with following God, and it pulls us in two different directions to effectively operate in our own strength, using our own abilities. And that is totally contradictory to grace. So all religious systems are law-based in some way, not grace-based. And God wants us to come into a free relationship with him through grace. So, okay, we've talked about all those controversial subjects before, and it hasn't triggered so much as talking about the issue of Zionism. Now, I'm going to tackle that in 2 chapters in the book I'm writing, really go back into the roots of it, what was behind it, why we've been deceived by it, and how it's used its agenda, which is a Luciferian agenda for one world government, which Jonathan is very clearly presented, which is absolutely true. What's behind it? Now, the part of the problem is, whenever you state anything and talk anything about Israel, or as a nation state, and their politics, you're called anti-Semitic. Now, I can disagree with anyone's politics, and I don't believe I'm anti-Semitic. Also, if you talk about the religion of Judaism, then you're anti-Semitic. Well, I'm not. No more than I'm anti-Islam or anti-Hindu, because I don't believe that Judaism, Islam, or Hinduism have any answers to get you into a relationship with God. They're all false religions. And Judaism as a religion was very different in Jesus's day as it was in Moses's day, and it's very different as it is today. And it has had both Talmudic and Kabbalah influences behind it. So I am not against any individual person based on their race or based on their religion. And I would say every one of those people are child of God, children of God, and God wants to have them to have a revelation of himself. Okay. So I am not denying that a Holocaust took place during the Second World War, in which a lot of Jewish people and other people also were killed. That happened. I don't know the exact details of it. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying this, but behind it, I do believe there's an agenda, which you won't find in the history books. And that agenda was to promote the same thing that was behind the Russian Revolution and other revolutions and any revolution. Because remember, what is Lucifer? A liar and a murderer from the beginning. So all deception and all wars and conflict, in which ends up in death and destruction, is sourced in that. And competition and conflict and tribalism and nationalism and fundamentalism, whether it be Christian fundamentalism or Islamic fundamentalism or Judaistic fundamentalism, is actually coming from the same source, and it's not from God. Okay, so I'm not denying that that took place, but I believe there was an agenda which was hidden behind why it took place, and that's what I'm saying. But also, I'm also saying, why do you think that that is still remembered after all this time, as with Holocaust Day and with Holocaust museums and everything else? Why has that been continued to be remembered in history? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't remember it, because we want to remember anything and learn from the lessons and not be doing that sort of stuff again. But the agenda to keep it on the thing is because of the Zionist agenda behind it. Now, when you talk about Jewish people, you can be called anti-Semitic if you are discriminating because they believe in a religion. Now, Jonathan used the word Jew a lot of the times, and I don't think he was ever talking about Jewish people per se, because they've got either they believe they're from a racial thing of Jewish family or parents, or they believe in Judaism, because essentially Judaism is a religion, not a race per se. So we're not talking about Jewish people, we're talking about what's behind the system. And it's very difficult, obviously, to challenge the system without appearing that you're against the people. And I'm not against Jewish people or Islamic people or any people. I believe that all need to be loved into the kingdom of God, because God loves them equally. And as he loves me, he loves anybody who's a follower of any religion as much as he loves me. Probably they don't know his love as much as I know it, because I've experienced it and I've engaged with it. So what I would say is, yes, this happened in history. The agenda behind it has been hidden. And there are other things that have happened in history which were worse and have never, ever been part of the historical record, or that most people would know. So, and Jonathan did share some of that. Why are we not having such in history of the 100 million people who were killed in Russia, in the Red Terror, and in other things from Stalin and through that whole history? No one really bothers about that so much. And most of those people were Christians. Why do we not know about the Holodomor? in which 6 to 10 million Ukrainians were starved to death by the Russians in 1932 to 1933. Generally accepted. In 1973, the UN agreed, because 25 countries signed a document forcing them to accept that this took place in history. Somewhere between 3.9 million Ukrainians were starved in a year. And then 6.1 million died through birth defects in the following years. Horrendous things. Why do we not hear 200 million people, many of them Christians, who were killed in China? Or the 15 million Black African people who were killed by Leopold in Africa? Now, all those things are history. All those things took place, but you won't normally get taught, and there won't be Russian days or Holodomor days, because the agenda to keep it on the record is not there, because behind it is an agenda. It is a Luciferian agenda, and it is about one world government system, which is antichrist. So for me, I'm not denying any of those things took place, and it's a tragedy. Anyone dies. And when genocide takes place, whether it's in Africa, you know, in Rwanda and all of those things, and when it took place in the former Yugoslavia and all of, I mean, they're horrendous things that man does to one another based on what? A Luciferian agenda. I mean, it's there within all of that. So I'm basically want to encourage you all to do your own research. Don't just believe, I've said this in the beginning, don't just believe anything any of us say. If you feel you want to find out, go and try and find out. But I would encourage you to go back to God. And if anything triggers you in anything, whether we're talking about people being saved out of the fiery places, I like to call it, after death, whether we're talking about fallen angels being restored, and therefore Lucifer himself being restored as a possibility, and any created being being restored, or whether we're talking about dimensions being restored or dealing with things that are going on, engage God yourself around that and find where you sit. And I believe we need to be open to do that and to pursue that and not to be censored in doing it. And I do not believe Jonathan is anti-Semitic in any way. He's on a journey to try and understand what happened in the light. And this is what I think a shame he didn't really get to actually share what was behind all this in a way and bring it to a conclusion, because it's difficult. And there was an atmosphere which actually created a difficulty in continuing sharing it. Now, end of the day, I want us to respect and honor and love each other in spite of differences and in spite of different opinions. And, you know, when I finish this book and I write this book, I no doubt will be accused of some of the things that Jonathan might be, even though I'm not anti-Semitic and I'm not saying that none of these things took place, but I'm trying to find out what was behind it. What was behind that whole agenda? And I believe Zionism, getting a Jewish homeland, and the reason for that being that would be a Messiah coming on earth to control the world under a Luciferian system, is behind it. Now, I'm not going to support that system. So I'm never going to support Christian Zionism or Zionism in any form. I also believe we need to be careful of an infiltration into the mystic movement of Christian roots teaching, which is under another guise is trying to get us back under the law. Jonathan talked about Noahide law and how that is trying to bring people back under a law-based system. Paul said to the Galatians, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" They were bewitched into going back under a law-based system that was persecuting them in their day. And we need to be very careful we do not start taking on any old covenant beliefs or system which is law-based under a name of something else. So be very careful of anything to do with Hebrew roots. Now you can look it up for yourself, and it's out there in many guises, in many forms, but its objective is the same Luciferian objective, to get you back under a system of bondage so that you are not able to, as sons, bring the kingdom to fill the earth. Because ultimately, if we are in bondage as sons of God, creation won't be set free. Because creation will be set free into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And that is an expression of the light and love of God towards all creation, including every person from every background, of every ethnicity, of every religious orientation, or any other form, because God loves them. And if we're going to demonstrate the love of God, we need to demonstrate that to everybody. And everything that the Lucifer will do will be divisive. It will seek to separate us from one another and the union that God wants us. And that could be within those who are believers, and that will definitely be within the world. So fundamentalism and nationalism are part of that agenda. So be very careful to see what frequency is on everything. And the more time you spend in the frequency of love and light and truth in God, the easier it will be to determine and discern what frequencies are on the things in the world. You know, and be careful that you don't just accept everything because someone says it, or it's in the news, or it's not in the news. Just be more discerning. We practice our training our senses to discern that which is good or evil. So what is the root or the frequency that something carries? And in discerning that, we will be able to see more clearly what is the religious and political spirit doing in our day and not get involved with it. Nancy talked quite a bit last night about let's not get involved in a political solution to a world problem which is spiritual. No systems, whether they be financial, health, energy, or any of the other things, which I do all believe need resetting, and all of the control systems that are behind that, which you could say are cabals and Illuminati and all different names out there, they're all serving one master, and it isn't Jesus. So let's make sure whatever we do is done in love, that we love one another, that we forgive one another when we have differences. And ultimately, I believe we'll all come to a revelation of the full knowledge of the truth, and we'll all realize we were wrong. Yeah. Bottom line, when it comes to Jesus being the truth, my understanding and my experience of the truth in my life right now, I guarantee there are things that I am wrong about because I don't know all of the truth and I don't know everything about everything. So I guarantee there are some things I'm wrong. So let's have some grace for each other on the journey and honor and respect one another, even if we're strongly moved and through emotions to disagree, because we do not want to come in the same spirit that the enemy does, which is to cause division and competition and conflict and then tribalism. It's like, I do not want to be part of a tribe that's separate from anybody else. Because as soon as I've done that, I've come against God's purpose to bless every family of the earth. And that's what the restoration of all things is about, restoring every person, every being, everything that's ever been made, created by Jesus and for him, and bring it all back into a union of harmony and oneness so that we actually can all be who he created us to be. So I'm gonna leave it there, but I'm just gonna encourage you to take everything back to the Father with an open heart and an open mind, and just ask him about all the things that you might or might not be concerned about. And that is the source of truth. So we are only giving you the information from what we know. It may be, some of it for me, I'm sharing my testimony. Some things, when it comes to history, I wasn't there. Yes, I've gone back into history and I've seen some things and how they took place, because I'll get on to this session when we look about time and how we can be served. Time can serve us and help us to find out things if we need to find out things. Now, as I've been writing this book, there are historical things about how things began that I wanted to find out about, because I wanted to see what was behind the division and denominating right throughout history and the empire building and everything else. So I asked the Father to take me onto the timeline and to show me what I needed to see. And so I was able to see some things, which for me now, that's a testimony that I can say, I believe that took place. And this is how it took place. Now, there are other things in history, I've got no idea what happened. And I don't need to, because it isn't part of what I need to address at this moment in time. So I'm just going to get on now with my presentation and what that will be. At the moment, you're all on my screen, so I need to get rid of you from my screen and get the presentation going. Okie dokie. There we go. So ultimately, in the last session, I talked about creative abilities. And as we mature or ascend, we will discover that we have creative abilities far beyond what we could have imagined or thought. We have the ability to live in multidimensional realms, to engage those realms, dwell in those realms, and not just travel to dimensions. And we have abilities to outwork God's purpose in restoration and all those things. So having created some beings, and I know some people will struggle with that. How could you create a sentient being? Well, I just did, as I described. Now, there are those in the mystical movement who will teach that you can create demons from within and birth them. I think Dr. O and Ian Clayton have taught that. I've got teaching on it by them. So they're happy to accept that you can create something negative. I just think creating something positive is a much better way of looking at it. So for me, this is my testimony, and I can't deny what happened. So the Father said, son, do not be overwhelmed by what you are being called to do. It is your destiny and that of all our sons to be creatively responsible. Creating guardians was just another step on your journey of discovering the creative reality of who you are and what you're capable of. Now, it was a stretch. I'm not saying it did not stretch me, and I was not somewhat initially nervous until I engaged the Father around it. But now it makes sense. It makes sense of so much else the Father's been talking to me about, which I didn't really get, and now I do. So be open to an expansion of your consciousness to true sonship and what the abilities are, and make sure that you're not limited. Limitless. Engage with the angel of limitless. And let limitless it help to expand your consciousness to the reality of who you are as a son of God. Creation is waiting, longing, and groaning for the revealing of the creative glory of sonship. It can be set free and restored as we learn to bring that freedom that we've received and release it to creation itself. You have felt it and have been moved by it many times, and that's true. You know, I've had these experiences with creation over the last 10, 12 years. And even before that, I've always been drawn to nature and things like that, because I sensed something there that has motivated you to keep going and not give up. You know, and sometimes it's hard work, all this. You know, it feels like, you know, are we really seeing any change? Well, sometimes, you know, it can seem like, oh, there is just so much to do. You know, how many trillion of angels are there? How many trillion of fallen angels are there? How many, I mean, you look at it and think, really, are we this small group of 7 billion people on the planet? Are we going to do all that? Well, nothing is impossible with God. And that's what Jesus said. Nothing is impossible with God. And so I am beginning to believe what he thinks is possible and come into agreement with him, so I don't get overawed and overwhelmed by the size of the task. Because I know things can change dramatically. Even though this is a process, sometimes there are things that happen that catalyze and push that process forward significantly. And I believe God has the capacity to switch the light on for believers, those who already know him, and also switch the light on for those who are not yet believers, to come to a realization of love. Because that is, I think, the primary agenda, is for an awakening to love, and all that that means, which will put mankind back in love with creation through being in love with God himself in a way which is beyond what most people experience right now. So I am not going to give up until I see the restoration of all things. And when my role here on earth is fulfilled, I'll quite happily be translated and carry that role on somewhere else. I would love to be able to see the full dimension of heaven and earth coming back into restoration in my lifetime with the generations that are to come, because I believe God is looking for 3 generations to come together in agreement, because that will bring government to the earth. And we've never had 3 generations since Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's always been one generation has failed to continue, or there's been separation or division. And every move of God, which we would call revivals or other things, which has brought an unveiling of truth, has always become denominalized, and then that's fossilized, and then it becomes tribal, and then it's separated, and the next generation almost has to start again and find its own truth rather than walking together. You know, I am not passing the baton to anybody. You know, I am going to walk with that baton with the next generation, and hopefully the next generation, to see the fulfillment of everything God desires, because I believe he wants us to work together in union. And you always get a divide between generations, you know, rebellion between the young and the old and all that stuff. Let's make sure that we do not get stuck in a mystical truth and not move on to whatever's coming. Because I guarantee there is more progressive revelation coming. Don't get fossilized and stuck, well, we're the mystical group, and then get jealous of something else that comes along, because that's what gets happened all over. Let's make sure we maintain humility and open heart to embrace the progressive revelation that's going to come to bring us into deeper and deeper revelation of our sonship and to engage creation. Romans 8:19, for the anxious longing of creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. Creation is waiting for you. Creation is waiting for me. That creation itself will also be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. And some of that is why all the dimensions I've engaged, which I've seen that need restoration, are in slavery of some sort. That slavery seems to be the hallmark of lost identity, and where systems are in place to keep people from their true identity in God, they are enslaved one way or another, either physically or emotionally or spiritually. In any way, I believe slavery is what comes through the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You know, slavery to death, I mean, all those things enslave us and keep us. And Paul called it being conformed to this world in Romans 12. Do not be conformed to this world. And literally what he meant was, do not be conformed to the religious and political systems of this world, because he was really talking about Judaism, and he was talking about Roman political. Do not be conformed to the culture around you. And you could say, do not be conformed to American culture, British culture, German culture, Chinese culture, Italian culture, Spanish culture, any culture, because all of those cultures, although they might have some wonderful things in there, actually have come out of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because they are humanistically developed. Some of them may reflect some of the creativity that God has placed within all of us, but don't embrace the culture which is anti-Christian culture, or anti-Christ culture, let's say, because I don't want to get into Christian culture either, or any religious culture, or any political culture, or any other form of culture which is man-made, because they will just create a slavery and a conformity to press you into the mold of that culture. And that, I know English culture, because I've been born in England and live in England. I know what English culture does and how it can enslave you into a mindset and belief system and conform you to a particular way of behavior. I'm aware of some American culture. I'm aware of some of these cultural things, and some of it, we need to be very, very careful that we're not living out of that culture and we're slaves without knowing it. Because ultimately, the greatest form of slavery is that which you do not know you're in, which is why lie busters and other ministries that seek to get you free is all about revealing the truth of the deception you're living in without knowing it. Most of us, if we knew the deceptions we were in, would want to do something about it. Part of the problem is we don't. So we've got to be discerning to see what is triggering us. What's triggering our emotions? What's triggering our behaviors? Why do we think that way? Why did we behave that way? Why am I defensive here? Why am I aggressive here? What stimulates me behaviorally that's come from culture that I am deceived by? What religious stimulus? A friend of mine who I've known for quite a long time online, God told her to leave the institutional church, which she had been part of for 40 odd years and had faithfully served and was having impact and was teaching people within it, whatever else. And God told her to leave. And so she was obedient. Her husband was like, yippee, we're free, sort of reaction. She was more like every Sunday for months, every time it came to the time they would be leaving to go to the church meeting, she felt guilty. She felt guilty. Now, what caused her to feel guilty? The same deceptive thing that keeps us in bondage to fear, guilt and fear, because this is what comes. It's usually guilt and fear that go together to conform us to the pattern of, well, I need to go to church. If I don't go to church, well, don't forsake meeting together. It's the Bible says. Well, who did he say that to? He didn't say it to me. I wasn't alive in the time when the Bible was written, to the culture it was written in the time it was written. So actually, what does it mean to me? I have to get the Spirit to apply that to me. And I'm not going to allow the religious system that says, well, you've got to go to a church service every Sunday. Otherwise, you're rebelling against God and you're a backslider. How many people have been called a backslider because they've been following God? I was told that I was sliding down the slippery slope away from orthodoxy. One day when I was talking about the whole issue of hell and all that stuff, and I was like, no, I'm not sliding down it. I'm skiing down it, and I'm enjoying the ride away from what other people think is true when God is telling me it's not true. So let's make sure we're not enslaved by anything, because the source of that in slavery, and that the truth that we know will set us free. And it says, why did Jesus come? To set us free. It is for freedom that you have been set free. So don't come again under another yoke of bondage. Whatever that bondage might be, make sure you're not in bondage. And that requires a relationship with God face to face to reveal where we're not living out of the truth of who we are from God's perspective. Only a face-to-face reality of relationship with God will reveal the truth to a degree that will enable us to live out of the truth of who he says we are, and in our agreement with that, begin to manifest it. Because as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So look at your life and you will be a manifestation of what you think in your heart, what you believe in your heart right now. And so if you don't like some of the things that are in your life right now, look at what you're believing in your heart, and some of what you believe is a deception that you don't even know that you're being deceived. I'll leave it there, but I would encourage you to really seek God about that so that you're not conformed to anything, but you are transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you can fully embrace who you are as a son of God and fully embrace the full capacity of sonship in its full creative sense. So now you know what is possible. You will receive more and greater creative mandates that are part of your progressive ascension to full and mature sonship. So I'm looking forward to more assignments from God in a creative way, whichever that creative way is. And I'm not putting any of my thoughts on that. I'm going to wait until he directs that and leads it. Now that you know the process of creation, a personal testimony of your creative abilities, you can rest and be so that you can just choose the creative reality that is aligned to our heart. So I never want to create something or do anything that's outside of the intention and desire of the Father's heart, which is why I must stay in fellowship, in relationship, in abiding within face-to-face, heart-to-heart, mind-to-mind relationship. As you have seen and experienced so many times that the steps of the process merge into one choice once you know them by experience. Now, in my life, I've done everything linearly. In a sense, I had to learn this and then that, and then the next, and then the next. And eventually, when I've learned a whole process, I can then do the process. And then I don't have to think of the linearity of it. I can just do it. It's like when I learned to drive. First driving lessons, oh, the driving instructor must have had his heart in his mouth when I first took to the road. And I also was very nervous because I was not very confident, because the very first time I drove a car, I crashed it. It was on my friend's farm and he had an old car and we were riding around the fields and he got me to drive back through the gate. And of course I missed the gate and hit the gate, or the pillars of the gate, and crashed the car. So when it came to driving, and I had no license, this is when I was like 15, you know, so when it came to like 17, when we can learn to drive in the UK, it was like, oh, the last time I drove a car, I crashed it. And I was so nervous when I got into that car with the driving instructor. But he didn't get me to drive around Silverstone, the Formula One track, on day one. In fact, he never got me to drive around that, unfortunately, because I would have loved to do it by come the end. But what he did was he took me step by step into the process of learning how to drive, how to look in the mirrors, how to use the gears, because most of our drives are stick shifts, as you call it. So they're manual gears, not automatics. So we have to learn how to use the gears, how to use the brake and the clutch, because we have a clutch, which means we have to use the clutch when we stop the car. I mean, it's, you know, automatic cars are so much easier, but they're not so much fun, I don't think. So I had to learn. And eventually I took my test and I put it all together and I could drive. And then I was given my license. And the next day I drove my friends and it was like, I was free. I can drive. I wasn't thinking about mirrors, gears. I just drove. And it becomes instinctively a part of us. And the same thing applies to things spiritually. Once we've learned how to do them and we've practiced doing them, which is why we have to practice training our senses, we then can do them. So I know now how to create something. I know the process, and I don't have to linearly, in one sense, just, I gotta do this, gotta do this, gotta, I can just be. So being takes all the doings that you've done to learn and puts them all together into a state of consciousness, which is just who you are. And when we discover who we are, nothing is impossible, because the limitations are truly removed when we really discover who we really are. You can live in quantum moments that are all processes, but feel like instantaneous creative choices of reality. That's why we've got to engage with time and allow time to work with us and cooperate with us in partnership, that we can be creative in a way that God was. Jesus spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. Now, was there a process that was going on when he spoke that? Yes. Now I can go into the scientific part of that process and what was going on in when something formed, and the frequency of his voice and the vibrational energy of his voice, which was activating something to come into reality, all of that. But reality, he just said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So we will come to a point on our journey where we will be as confident to say, "Let there be," and there will be. Now, most of the time, what I am saying, "Let there be," is a spiritual process in the realms of heaven that's preparing for what is going to manifest on earth, because I'm establishing the kingdom in heaven so it can manifest on earth. So I'm working within the will or heart or purposes of God to be part of that creative process, to call things that be not as if they are, which is like, let there be light, was calling something which didn't exist before in that form, although obviously it existed because it was God. God is light. So, you know, you put all this stuff together and you can start to see a creative process. But we will get to the point where we will be able to say, not just spiritually in the realms of heaven, but physically on the realms of earth, let there be, and it will be. Because light will collapse the quantum wave function, which means a possibility which exists until you choose it, and then it becomes a reality. Part of the problem that most people are double, triple, or quadruple minded, and they cannot choose because of doubt and unbelief and fear. So when it comes to a choice, you've got so many choices that you struggle to make one. And most of it is because you don't actually believe that what you're going to choose has come about. So we've got to get to that point where we actually have the limitations removed, and we will be able to manifest actually those things on earth, as well as just manifest them in the spiritual realm. So I've done some manifestations on earth, and I've seen things change instantly because I just chose the reality. Now, someone would say, oh, well, that would just have happened anyway. Well, it's okay. You can be skeptical as much as you like. You know, it doesn't affect my testimony, your skepticism of what I say. You know, it's my testimony. It happened. So, you know, when I was told, and I was sitting on a runway in Bristol Airport going to fly to Holland to eventually fly to South Africa, I think it was, I was told on the tannoy, the pilot basically says, we've lost our flight for takeoff and we're going to now be at least half an hour, possibly longer. And we've also lost our landing slot. So we will probably be well over an hour late. Now, I had less than an hour to make my connection to South Africa. So that was not an option to me. I checked it out with the Father. Do I feel, do you want me to make sure this doesn't happen? Yes. So I did. So simply, I chose the reality at that. I didn't panic. I didn't start thinking, oh no, I'm going to miss my connection. How am I going to get another game? When's the next flight? And you, all of a sudden, you're now creating your future out of the worry and anxiety that you're expressing in your head. I didn't do any of that. I simply chose, I am not going to miss my flight. I chose that reality. I spoke it into being in my head. I didn't speak it out loud, but I spoke it out, which is just as powerful because it's in the spiritual realm that this stuff takes place. And I spoke out that in my mind, I will not miss my flight. Within 30 seconds, the pilot came on and said, they've just given us a new slot. And we took off on time. And we had a new landing slot and we landed on time and I did not miss my thing. Now, that is really, really important. It's take captive the thought. What happens is all about what you do with the first thought of what happens when you're facing something. And if you start extrapolating the fear of what could happen, you'll end up creating that. And if you take captive the thought, align it to God, the truth, Jesus. What's Jesus's opinion on this situation? Ah, I agree with that. Then you then can become creative in every situation. And that can be that you can do things which are termed miraculous. You know, you can actually, you know, I have, you know, and these are time and miracles. You know, I've ended up in places and done things which weren't physically possible. You know, I've done things which weren't physically possible. You know, I've opened things which were locked. I've done things because I chose to do it. Simply the choice. I never doubted, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do it. So it was like, does the Father want me to be locked out of my house? Because I locked myself out of my house one day. You know, it was just, I went out to the garage to get something and the door shut behind me and I forgot to take my keys. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to have to go and get my keys. And it's like, no, I took captive the thought. What do? Okay, I'll open the door. So I opened the door. Now, I could have chosen to walk through the door, because that's another solution. I could have walked, taken my whole being, taken it out of sync with this realm, put it into the spiritual realm, quantumly tunneled and gone throughout on the other side and been inside. I could have chosen that. But I just chose to open the door and it opened, even though it was locked. So what I'm saying is learn to don't let doubt and unbelief hinder you in what is possible, because you are a creative being and you can choose to create things once you begin to actually know the process. Now, for some people, I think for someone like Lindy, she would just be like, I don't need to know the process, I'll just do it. Well, that's fine. She has the capability of doing that because she'll just embrace something and do it. And that's awesome. And in fact, that's what I'm like. But I still have learned some of the processes that have helped me. Like, how do I brood? How do I incubate? How do I activate? How do I energize? How do I get to the point where I can say, let there be, and it just happens? Well, that's my journey. Now my journey is manifested in reality. So I've learned to do that. And I think all of us can. Son, never stop living in the reality of unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy, as they must always be the relational foundation of all creative choice. Make sure you do not choose to do something out of fear, anger, unforgiveness, hatred, any negative emotion. Make choices based in love. And that means make choices based in God, because God's love. Make choices based on the heart of God himself. That means we need intimacy. Otherwise, we can't make those choices. Without unconditional, loving relationships that express loving kindness, everything is futile, pointless, and meaningless. And we get caught up in so many pointless, futile, and meaningless things because we are operating outside of love. Let's stay within love, because within love, we're in God. Unconditional love defines true reality. Everything else is a deception and must be exposed by the light of love and truth. So I believe that's what God is doing. The light is beginning to shine to reveal deceptions that we are living in, personal, corporate, global deceptions, what's behind, who's in control, financial control, educational control, health control, political control. What's behind it all? God is showing us. And actually what he's showing us is the kingdom of God is greater than any other system. And all those systems will be shaken and they will come to nothing. And the kingdom of God will remain. That I absolutely believe, but we're part of that journey and process. And the more people, sons of God, children of God, believe in the negativity, the harder it is for those who believe in the positive to outweigh them. Now, fortunately, it's an exponential. The positive sense of love and light is exponential compared to the negative side. So you don't need an equal balance to tip the scales. And if you look at consciousness and the power of consciousness and scales of consciousness, you don't need equal levels of good consciousness and bad consciousness and then tip the scale. Exponential. Nancy talked last night about exponential energy. It's like 1 can put 1,000 to 10,000. So there's an exponential 1 to the power of. So, you know, 4 by 4, 16, 16 by 16, 256, 256 by 256, 6,530 or whatever it is. Then you start to get to levels, and eventually, what was there? Oct trillion times itself, 19 times amounts of everything. And when our consciousness starts to rise to a level of light, the light of truth and love, we will start to tip the balance in the planet. And we have already started to tip the balance in the planet because there is an awakening to love taking place. And we're starting to tip the balance in the universe because the dimensions are beginning to sense and feel the frequencies of love and light that are being revealed, and hope that we are carrying. So we're having an effect. The angelic realm is recognizing what we're carrying and responding to us. Even the fallen angelic realm is recognizing it. They're coming into the courts of heaven and asking, can they be restored? That's a pretty powerful shift in the light of truth, because we are radiating that truth. We are being a frequency. Even the frequency of the planet, Schumann's frequency, is spiking as we begin to legislate. When I was with Nancy in Colorado Springs and we were doing a Restoration of All Things conference there, Lindy led some activations, and there were some music activations that went on. And actually the recording of Schumann's frequency, which is done by some Russian scientists somewhere, and they put it on the internet every day, and you can see the sort of general thing. There were huge spikes, and that's a level of consciousness. Normally, I think it's 7.83 hertz, and it spiked to 15, 16 hertz and 32 hertz while we were legislating and doing things in the spiritual realm. It is having an effect. The planet is awakening. Why do you think the elementals are engaging with us? I'd never heard of elementals until the last few years. All of a sudden, they're communicating with us. The planet is communicating with us. We've engaged in our corporate ascensions with the core of the earth, and the core of the earth communicated how upset the core of the earth felt that we had associated it with negative things. Because we always think of under the earth as hell. And the core of the earth was like, don't label me. Don't label me with this negativity. And we had to apologize, and we had to renounce that, and we had to say sorry so that we could get restored. Because the core of the earth is absolutely vital to us and the magnetic field of the earth and everything around. I mean, we've got to come together and tend and cultivate and come into harmony with these things. But it's happening. This is happening. Yeah, I can feel it happening, and I can see it happening. Friends of mine are communicating with plants, with the music of the plants. Plants themselves are communicating with us. Now, they have some fantastic testimonies. You know, these things are sentient. They were made to connect with us as sons of God. And we've lost connection, and we're reconnecting because our sonship is beginning to stimulate these things to come alive to us again, to reach out to us with frequency and vibration and communication. It's all happening. Let's start to embrace it. Son, you will learn to let go of your past knowledge and experiences so that you can truly be creative and not just from form variations of what already exists. Now, generally speaking, if we were to create something, we have a memory that helps us to create something out of the memory we've got, or it can hinder us because we get stuck in conformity to what we already know rather than true creativity, which is going to create something that hasn't existed before. So we've got to ensure that our minds get renewed and we don't get stuck just forming things as they've already been formed, because within the discovery house of the Chancellor's houses of heaven, there are things that have never yet been seen on earth for the coming generations and for the ages to come. And they're things that have never been seen. They have no grid of reference for us. So it's very hard to create something when you're relying on the memory of what you already know. So we've got to be open to more. So there are other levels of truth and enlightenment that are to be experienced. So let's be open and not closed to something new and progressive. 22nd of April, 2021. So we're getting up to date in some of my experiences. During a restoration government ascension, we ascended what looked like a helical DNA ladder. And this was with Lindy and Nancy, I think, and we engaged the tree of life where there was a sap-like substance released. Now, this is like, oh, what happened? What was going on? What was the sap? Now I'm just like seeing this, and it's like, well, what's that sap for? You know, what are we going to do with that sap? You know, so I'm already thinking about not just what we're seeing, but what we're going to do with it. You know, we engaged a counterfeit council where some trafficking strategy, I'm talking about off-world trafficking as well as could be on-world trafficking as well, was taking place. And we saw some beings who were acting like guards, stopping victims from believing in the possibility of freedom. Because if you keep people in slavery believing that there's no chance of freedom, they're never going to be in agreement with freedom. And it's so much harder to set people free when they don't believe they can be free. So there's a deception agenda to keep people in slavery and in bondage to whatever it might be, whether it be trafficking or any other issue, actually. So we also engaged and saw an infinity loop. we saw a cycle that the enemy was taking us through, taking the world through over generations and repeating cycles of generations that are deceiving mankind into believing in the possibility of eternal life through the religious works and self-effort. So this infinity loop was keeping us slaves to the machine, to the system, to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to self-effort, to self-improvement, to self-esteem, everything based in what we can do, a humanistic view. And mankind has been trapped into that. It's just gone round and round and round. And I like to think of it, it's like, it's the belief, those beliefs that have trapped us. It's like living on a hamster wheel. Now, I used to have hamsters. My children always had loads of hamsters. They let them get together and we had even more hamsters. And then we had even more hamsters within 3 weeks of those first hamsters. I mean, it was like we had a plague of hamsters. We had to try and give them all away. But those hamsters had a little wheel and they would go around that little wheel and they'd run around that little wheel, and they would do their exercise, which was great for them, but they didn't get anywhere. They never got outside their cage. They went round and round the wheel inside their cage, thinking, like whatever they thought, if hamsters think. But if we're like that, are we in a cage and are we going round and round and round, getting nowhere? We need to think. Am I trapped in a belief system? Am I trapped in a system of works? Do I feel obliged and duty bound to do something? Am I trapped in loyalty to something? Maybe a church system, maybe a denomination, maybe a person. Am I trapped in a system that makes me have to please God, be obedient to God in a legalistic way? And I'm not saying we should not have a desire to be pleasing to God, but let's remember we already are pleasing to him without having to do anything, and doing something won't make us any more pleasing to him. But I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything, but look at the motive of why we do something. Are we trapped on a motivation which is driven from deception that keeps us in bondage? And are we weary and heavy laden and burdened and worn out? Because that was what Jesus said the religious system did, and that was following the law, trying to think the law was going to get them a relationship with God. He described it as being weary and heavy laden, and he said, come to me and find rest. Come to me and find rest for your soul. So we've got to be very careful. If you do not have enough energy, if you're always weary, if everything's a burden and everything feels hard in life, ask the question, am I in a cage and am I on a hamster wheel? If you can picture that. Because if you're weary, you will never have enough strength to do what God wants you to do. But there's limitless energy when you activate the energy within, and when you activate the Merkaba within, and then you activate all your energy gates. And when you've got the river of life flowing through as rivers of living water, when you've got heaven and the life of God and the Spirit flowing through you in life, this limitless energy. That's why deception keeps us from the truth and keeps us in a cage, in a religious cage, in a political cage, in any system cage, in a health cage, that you're in slavery to the pharma industry. Now, again, I'm not telling you to stop taking your medication, but I'm telling you there is a solution that will enable you to stop taking your medication when you engage God for the truth, because the truth will set you free from anything that's got you in that cage. And I think the religious cages are the worst, because they bring guilt, shame, and condemnation, which demotivates and creates a huge issue for people. Jesus said, when he said, come to me and find rest, he said two things: take my yoke upon you. And he said, my burden is light, my yoke's easy. And when he said, take my yoke upon you, he said, learn from me. So when we look at Jesus and how Jesus related to the Father and how he lived on earth, and how he then set people free from the system that he was in, because he undid the system for them. You've heard it said, I say unto you. And that was the oral traditional system that they put all those traditions around what they were doing and kept them in bondage. And Jesus came to set them free. He said, learn from me to be gentle and humble in heart. And gentleness is absolute knowledge of the strength you possess or the abilities you possess in total surrender to the Father. That's what he was. He was the creator. And yet he totally came to that place where he knew who he was, his identity, but he submitted his identity to only do what he heard the Father say, and only say that, only do what he saw the Father doing. It was a total intimate relationship with the Father. And then he said, I'm humble in heart. Learn from me because I'm gentle in heart and humble in heart. What is humility? Not I'm nobody, I'm a worm, I'm nothing, I can't do anything. That's false religious humility, which actually is pride. If you believe that you can't do something that God says that you can, you're in pride. Your beliefs are greater than God's belief to you. That's pride. Let's humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God and accept who he says we are and what he says we are. And then we will begin to outwork who he says we are, and we'll truly be at rest. You'll never be at rest if you're striving to find who you are in what you do. We find who we are in who he says we are. And when we come into an agreement with who he says we are going to outwork the reality of that in everyday life. The sap from the tree of life was applied. It was applied to bring freedom to those trapped by a form of AI. Now, I'm not going to get into how AI and trafficking and all these things go on, but there's stuff. Now, I'm not an expert on that stuff. Other people know way more than I do, but I saw all this taking place, so I don't deny that this is truth. So we applied the sap, and that substance was applied. And some of the beings that were guarding the control room that we encountered, we applied that sap to them. We doused them with something. And because God said so, I mean, I had no idea what we were doing. I'm just glad someone else did. And I saw what we were doing and I embraced it. And I felt in my spirit, yeah, that's it. That's what we should be doing. We're applying this sap, and as we applied the sap, then we began to engage the beings. We forgave them. We forgave them. We reminded them who they were. We went through a process of engaging. I haven't got time to go through the whole process, but we then began to see them transformed. And they who were guarding the process of keeping people in bondage then actually were transformed into the guardians they were truly supposed to be in guarding our dimension from influence negatively from other dimensions. In other words, the guardians of the portals out there. So this instance is like we saw them transformed and we enabled them to come back into the intended purpose that God had for them, which was a position in the constellations. Now, I'd shared my testimony of creating some guardians. Okay, so we felt corporately that testimony was ours, not just mine. So we felt we had a mandate to create some more guardians for some of those unguarded portals. Now, Nancy, bless her, she went for this. I mean, she was so excited. It's like I could feel the energy coming off her, even through Zoom. It was just awesome. So she simply chose to create a variety of beings, guardians, and she described them, and they were this size and they were wearing this. I'm just very practical and pragmatic. So I'm not even bothered with what they look like particularly. I'm sure I am creating something which forms something, but I just want to know what they're going to do, where they're going to go, how can we get them there? So I didn't even look at particularly the guardians, what they look like that I created. It was like, I was more convinced of, hey, I want those portals guarded. But Nancy described these beautiful beings and what they were wearing. And we then commissioned them to the portals, so again, it was lovely. It was great for me to have a confirmation that what I did individually was replicated corporately by others. And I believe we're going to have more and more testimonies of this to take place. So one of those created guardians went out to the constellation of Leo. That has obviously to do with a kingship function and other things. Now, I believe we can all learn to be creative as we're all sons made in the image of our Father who is creative, and Jesus is creative. it's like my journey has taken me from initially being totally tethered to the earth, unable to go anywhere outside of normal time space. My spirit and soul were so tethered to one another wrongly that my spirit could go nowhere independently. It's like I was in bondage, you know, and then I got set free, and my soul and spirit were separated, reintegrated. God did that for me, you know, and then I was able to live in dual realms of heaven and earth. Then I started to be quantumly entangled and able to be in heaven and function on the earth and flow from one to the other. Then I started to live in multiple realms and dimensions, you know, engage those quantum moments and expand them and all of those things. That was the journey. And that journey was a wonderful journey. It didn't happen overnight. Let me tell you, it was a hard, long journey of me being deconstructed, believing in things I didn't used to believe in and all that sort of stuff. I discovered that the core of my innermost being is a connection between the realms and the dimensions. Because isn't the kingdom of God within us? Isn't Father, Son, and Spirit in us? Isn't the doorway to heaven in us? Yep. So I discovered that in the core of my being, all the things that I'd engaged within myself, the gateways of my spirit, the gateways of my soul, the gateways of my body, the garden of my heart, all of those things all made sense when they all interconnected in the Merkaba within me. And that is the place of both communication and energy production and connection with heaven and connection with God. That's all within that within me. And it started to be activated, and I started to understand how it worked and how it functioned. So then I could see the river of life flowing out of heaven, flowing out of the Father's throne, flowing out of the Father's heart, flowing into me, flowing through me into the Merkaba, spirit, soul, and body, coming into oneness, Merkaba being activated, all the portals of where I am in the heavenly realms and all the dimensions, all being activated, instantly able to communicate wherever I am in the spirit, all happened. Energy within my energy gates activated. It was like those spinning discs of energy, those light discs of energy in me activated like a hydroelectric power plant, because it was like the river of life. Energy was flowing from my Merkaba, activating all those gateways. So I, as Lindy shared, I activated my heart gateway first. That's the core of my being, the garden of my heart, my very core, innermost being. All of those things, spirit, soul, and body, came together in that place. And then I activated the top next, which was the crown, connecting me to the realms of heaven. I activated the root next for me, which was connecting me to the earth, grounding me with creation. And then I activated any of the others in between, depending on what I was accessed. So I always activated 3. And then depending on what I was called to do every day, I activated the 4th or the 5th and the 6th. I've never activated yet 7 all in one go. Maybe I don't have the capacity to release that. Now, what I do, I don't spike with energy on the inside. I dissipate that energy by expanding my spirit around all the spheres that I have got access to. So my spirit right now is over this conference. This whole conference, all of you are within the shield of my spirit at this moment, because that's what I do. I expand it. And then all the energy that I generate through the Merkaba and my energy gates, I dissipate as rivers of living water flowing from my innermost being out into, I'm creating an energy field. And to start with, that energy field, and for most people, that energy field is a very little energy field, often called an aura, around them, which they haven't learned to expand. But I learned to expand it. Didn't Jesus say, don't stay in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth? It was like expansion. There's no end to the increase of his government and peace. It's like, don't get stuck in one place, in one thing. There is expansion, there's increase. So I expanded my spirit continually every day, and I see a flow of life in that realm. So I learned how to do that. You know, now I never would have even imagined. I mean, if you said that to me in 2010, I would have reacted. I would have manifested probably against that, because it would have been occult, new age rubbish. You know, that's how I would have saw it. But my journey has unveiled the truth of what is new age rubbish and seen that there's righteous real behind much of it, or some of it. I'm not saying all of it, because I don't know, but I've seen the righteous real behind energy and frequency and all of those things, and crystal bowls and all of, I mean, if anyone had told me in 2010 that I would be playing crystal bowls, or I would have 7, 8 crystal bowls on my desk and I would be able to use them, I would have probably gone apoplectic, or I would have just laughed, because it would be like, no way, Jose. But in reality, God took me on a journey. And when I went into Seattle in 2015, I think, or 16, and someone started playing crystal ball, I'm like, whoa, what's this? And then someone did a session on it. And then someone invited, I went into that session, and then I experienced what happened when they started playing in crystal balls with intention. And my whole being vibrated, and a whole realm opened up, and I could see things at a level I never saw before. I'm like, whoa. And then God inspired someone to give me one as a gift. And I learned how to play it in my room in the hotel. And then I was like, then I started playing them in public in the meeting. And it was just like, whoa, this is energy. No, I would have never believed that that was possible, because I would have been stuck in a limited view of from what I now believe and see, because I'm on a journey, a progressive journey that's unveiled that. Now, some people would say, well, you're just more and more deceived, not unveiled. I know the truth and the power that those things bring, and the healing and the dimension of what vibration and frequency does. So this is activated in me, you know, and I can use it, directly use it. If I need creativity, I'm writing a book right now, I activate that part, which is the creative part of my energy gates. I activate it and I become creative, because I'm not a writer. If I go back to my school days, reading and writing was never my thing. Grammar was never my thing, and none of it was any of my thing. Science was my thing. I love science. I was into science, sport, anything, reading, writing, English literature. Oh, forget it. Read it. I mean, I never read a book until I was 10. And then I read War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. In fact, The Time Machine was the first book I ever read. The Time Machine. Isn't that an amazing thing? But of course, God has used books right throughout my life, you know, in a way. So he's overcome some of my obstacles and some of my agenda. And so I activate creativity, because I'm creative in it, but I activate the energy. Now, when I'm talking to a lot of people and need to vocalize and verbalize and be able to share and relate to where they are and engage them, I activate the other gate, which is where my voice comes from, where that comes from. And depending on what I'm doing, because I've engaged with God every day, every morning, and I'm connected to him, I sense what I'm supposed to be doing. I have that heart. Something I don't know in my head, but I know I'm surrendered every day to only do what the Father's doing. So whatever the Father's doing, I'm going to need energy for. Well, in the past, I would have prayed, oh God, give me the strength that I need today. And, you know, if I prayed that prayer today, the Father would say, what are you doing? Why are you asking me to give you something that you have the capacity to generate yourself? Over the years, that's what's happened. Everything I used to ask God to do for me or other people, he now has equipped me to do, because I'm a son. I'm supposed to do the things that he does. I'm not supposed to sit back and pray and ask God as if I'm nobody and nothing and God can do everything. Of course he can. But he's chosen us to do that. We're his body on earth. We are Jesus with skin on, if you like, to reflect the light and truth of love of God to the world. I'm not getting that far, am I? I must get on to the whole thing of time, because I promised to do that. Okay. Now, I discovered obviously that I'm one spirit, soul, body, spirit, soul, body. I'm one in union with the Father, Son, and Spirit. All the creative realms are connected within me and within you, and we have access to them. So I went into an encounter on the 6th of May, in which it was another restoration government encounter, and I entwined in the light matrix of the Father's intentions. Now, that's what I've been doing recently. I go and entwine in that realm of light, and the intentions forms a matrix around me that begins to conform me to the Father's desires. And it is like a geometric matrix of light that forms around me. So I was in this matrix of light and I engaged the earth shield, And as I was there to release what I thought I'd received, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding and prudence as four angels that are angelic beings that I've engaged with previously surrounded me. And they stopped me seeing into the earth. And I'm like, yeah, but I wanted to release this into the earth. That's what I was feeling. But I just went with it. So they directed me out to the cosmos. And the light intention formed a connection that entangled me with the constellation of Cancer, the one I've been to a number of times. And it was like I was engaging in a wormhole, and instantly there, when my choice aligned with the intention, the resonance energized the connection. I was there. Now that's a description of what happens scientifically when you begin to energize something of a quantum entanglement. But actually, because God is everywhere, I can be entangled anywhere. But usually I connect with it when I engage with his intention. So I was energized by his intention, and that took me instantly out to this constellation of Cancer where the guardians were around the fiery portal, and it was glowing, and I'd never seen it glow like that before. So that I sort of engaged the guardians, and they gave me permission to enter. And when I did, I was drawn to a group of golden portals shaped like a Merkaba, like these points around the central core. Some beings emerged, and I recognized them as the Cervici, the ones I talked to before, the little ones with the heads which have got all these filaments in them, weird looking things. And I met them before with Nancy and Lindy, and then they had committed themselves to our service. So I knew this was obviously something important. So what happened was they informed me that I needed to help those that were deep in need, indicated by their countenance and frequencies. Now, they were telling me this, and that stimulated within me a deep desire and an urgency. It felt like I need to do something now, so I need to go and engage now. So I did, and I was directed towards another group of portals. So initially I felt that coming through those golden portals were these beings. They then directed me to another group of portals, and there was this strong sense of dread, foreboding, a deep sense of loss. And although I didn't enter it, I felt it. It was tangible. I felt emotional darkness. That's the only way I could describe it. Despair, I guess. And so I released everything that I had received when I was in the light matrix of the Father's intention, because that was what it was about. And because I was still in that place, because my spirit is in multiple places, and I was consciously connected, I became a conduit for the Father's heart to be released. So I was entangled with the Father's heart, and I was in this place. And then a stream of unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy entered that central portal of that group of portals. And it just streamed through me. I just became a willing conduit for the Father's heart to be released through that. And I felt something happen. I felt a frequency disturbance. I felt almost like a quaking. Something was moving within that portal. I didn't have permission to go into it, but I did have permission to engage it. And eventually I felt something come back. It was like a faint, but it was an encouraging response that the light of love and truth, love, grace, mercy had penetrated and had started to produce hope there. Now that is the precursor for someone going there to engage the beings, or the beings engaging with somebody, it may not be me, that will give them permission to go there and then begin to do whatever they're called to do. So there's preparatory work sometimes that needs to be done before you can go into a dimension. And this was a preparatory work, I felt. So again, I might have felt like a straw, but actually a lot went through that straw in that moment, fortunately. And I know there's such despair, such darkness. And I know sometimes you need to come together in union with others. And so I shared this with the group that I was doing it with and opened up that to them, that they could engage that if they felt led to do it. So I know it requires a union of many hearts to overcome places of darkness like that. And it might be better if groups would go back to engage those dimensions in the future, perhaps. So the Father also revealed that we were connected to a system of connections, like a network of veins, someone described it, an artery, is like a circulatory system. That the circulatory system to the constellational connections and to the, you could say, dimensional places was blocked. That there was something was blocking our engaging with it fully. We were engaging with it, but not as full as we could because there was a blockage. So we talked about that, and then we sort of engaged the Father, formed a strategy, what we're going to do. And then as we went back to engage, time came. The being of time just came and appeared just as we were going to do something. This being came. And I'd met the being before, but not in this context. It was new to some of the others, I think. So the time declared, I am for you, not against you. And I felt the weight of that declaration. It was like a frequency vibrating in me. And it was like offering a partnership, but indicating that our attitude towards time, our vocabulary towards time, our thinking towards time needed to change towards time. So as that happened, I started to reflect, myself and others started to reflect. What had I said or what had I thought about time that I had labeled it, and someone had a view of, like, it's like we put post-it notes over time with our declarations, which had almost stigmatized time and made it appear that time was against us. So each of us asked for forgiveness to time for our negative attitudes, our negative words, our negative thoughts, so we could sever the connection we had with time to do with aging. Because one of the things time showed us was our connection with time is negative because we think time is passing in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, years, decades, centuries. And actually, therefore, time is running out and we are going to die when our time has run out. And we say things like that. People say things like that. And so we knew we needed to have our understanding towards being tethered to time and aging needs severing. And also, the words that we'd use, I've not got enough time. I'm losing time. Time's running out. Connecting time with a passage. In other words, a one-way passage, an arrow going in one direction, and then it's gone. We've lost it. Connecting it with death. Time goes by, killing time, mark time, lose track of time, sands of time are running out. All time low, time pressure, time is money. So time is also commodified, which it does not like being commodified. Wasting time, no time to lose. All these things create this tension with the relationship with time that God intends us to have. So time offered to partner with us so the limitations and restrictions in our mind to the past, present, future will be removed so we could access everything, the cross, through the cross, across time, space. All of this would become a present reality that we could have. All sorts of possibilities, opportunities began to form in our minds. This partnership, we started to get excited. What could we do? There was a real sense of expectation, excitement, anticipation that things would take place. So it was awesome. And then there were beings around us, loads of angelic beings, cloud of witnesses. They all started to connect. And it felt like, and this is what I think some people saw, it was like symbolically they were holding hands across space-time, indicating that it was open for us to engage. They were almost like welcoming us to engage, because those beings also have history. And I feel that some of that was welcoming us to engage with their history. And therefore, when we came to engage a fallen angelic being, to ensure that time was with us, to enable us to engage in the memory or the activity that being was in God's original intention and purpose before they fell. And time was there to help us with that. So we engaged the circulatory system that we felt was connecting up all of creation. And At the blockage point, it was like, what do we do? Well, we felt we need to expand and be a force to force open the vessel like a stent, that it wouldn't be compressed, that we would expand and we would expand that ability to connect, and the blockages would be removed. And we began to do that through that circulatory system. And that what it felt like, there was a lot of energy that was stored up that couldn't get through that small sort of hole, if you like, or tube or tunnel. And as we released the pressure, it just started to pump. It felt like this was the Father's heart blood system, and it was pumping with a rhythm and a timing that was pumping the Father's heart of love and the light of love and the blood of Jesus, if you like, out into and through all those dimensions and through, you know, that system of circulation. So the blood of Jesus was carrying the intentions of the Father's heart. It was like an anointing of being pumped through the system and networks to constellations and dimensions. So it was a pretty cool experience, you know. And so sometimes you get all sorts of connections when you do encounters like this, that some person will get one aspect and some person will see another, and you bring it all together and you see there's a picture that formed. So we thanked and honored time for partnering with us, and there was a real sense of rejoicing that something lost was now restored. So I asked the question, you know, what can time help us with? What can time help you with right now? Think about it. Ask the Father about it if you find, well, I don't really know. But I do believe there are things that time wants to do to be involved with your life. Maybe it's to do with your past. Maybe it's to help you to go back and see some of the things that have happened, or the generational issues, or to unveil and reveal to you what went on in what generation, whatever it might be. Maybe historical events, that we will get revelation of historical events will give us insight into what God wants us to do to unblock or undeal with or deal with those events. Maybe being used in time, that time will give you access to go back and do things. Now, I've been used in time loads and loads and loads of times. You know, first time I was ever used in time, I was in a meeting in a worship setting. I was just surrendered to God, and it was just like, I was just like, oh God, what can we do? Where can we go? And immediately I found myself in 1856 or 1756, it was, I think, in the US, out in some wilds, and there was a cabin, and I walked up to the cabin, and I was physically manifested, even though, you know, my physical body didn't leave the room, but I did. And I was physically manifested. I went, knocked on the door. A couple came to the door, and they said, "Are you here to help us?" And I said, "Yes." I had no idea what I was there to do, but I said yes. And then they said, "Our child is dying." And the child had a real fever or something. And I just did what I knew to do, you know, and what I knew to do, I just lay on the child. That was, I remembered somewhere in the Bible that happened. So I just lay on the child, and it came into full health, completely healed, completely restored, whatever else. And I said goodbye. They thanked me. I walked out of the door, and I was back in my physical body in the meeting, like glazed. Did that happen? Did I just do that? Was I dreaming? You know, I went through all the questions that you ask when something like that happens. Did I change time? So I went to the Father and I said, "What happened? And did I change what happened in history?" And he said, "No, that's always happened in history. They were crying out. I heard their cries. I could have sent an angel, but I sent you because you were available." So I, being in that place of the eternal now of God, I was only now aware of it because that's the moment I stepped into that. But for them, it already happened, because when you're in that place, any time is open to you. Now, I've done that to see things in time. I've been back to see the pyramids, how they were formed, saw things within the pyramids, saw things which now I know because we've discovered that they're in there. All of that in an encounter. The next time I did that, it was 1820, I think, 4. Went back into the southern of the US, into this plantation area, into this big house, you know, went in there, knocked on the door. There was a whole lot of people wailing and crying in the house. You know, a lady had just given, I heard a child crying, a lady had given childbirth and died. And they were all around the bed, and they were all weeping and they were all crying. And I turned up. And I was like, "What do you want me to do, Father?" And he said, "Raise her from the dead." So again, I mean, I just lay on her. And as I was laying on her, I went into the court of the upright, where the cloud of witnesses are, and I found her. I went to find her because she didn't want to come back. You know, I mean, it's like most people don't when they get into that realm. She didn't want to come back. So I took her by the hand and I said, the Father wants you to come back. You have not fulfilled your destiny and your task on earth. So eventually I was able to pull her back into her physical body, and she became alive again, and everyone started rejoicing, and I came back into my physical form. And I asked the Father again, what was that about? And he said, she has more children to birth, and they have a significant role to play in the kingdom. Now, I resisted the temptation to find out who it was. I could have looked up the date of when this birth took place, and I didn't, because if the Father doesn't tell me, I don't need to know. But I believe. Now, I've been used loads of times like that. I've done all sorts of things like that, as have others. You know, and when I do conferences around things where we've got more time to activate things, we have an encounter where we go and do that. And, you know, most of my encounters are about saving people, rescuing people. A lot of children are involved in them, because God responds to the cries of children because they're simple faith. And so I've rescued children out of all sorts of places, you know, off slave ships. I mean, all sorts of stuff, you know. So we can be used in time. We can contract and expand time. We might have need of more than 24 hours in a day, if you like. So one of those hours might need to be 10 hours or whatever it needs to be. Restoring fallen angels, where we can go back and find out who they were or help them remember who they were and that sort of stuff. Question mark. Who knows what else? No limitations of this. It might be loads and loads of other things that might happen in this. So I believe God wants us to engage. Now, I have a transcript that I am not going to have time to read out now, okay? And I've got a whole load because I've sort of waffled quite a bit on this session and shared other things. That's okay. I just share whatever I feel led to share. So it's no problem. But I will make all those available to you when you look. We'll eventually make a conference package, and with the PDFs along with the recordings and everything else. So you will be able to see this transcript of an encounter where we engaged time and all of the individual activation things people said. And it was a fuller thing than I've just shared with you. And you can see that. And we will do that. And then I also was going to share, you know, where I am currently in the spiritual realms, heavenly realms, dimensional realms, and where I've learned to be in quantum moments in multiple places at the same time, and live in quantum moments of all the things I've learned over the last 10, 12 years. And they're all the places I now dwell and abiding simultaneously. And there's, you know, groups of them that work together in cooperation. And, you know, that's something I'll leave there for you to have a look at. But I do want to give us time to activate what we're doing. And so we can engage with time, because I think it's really important. But before we do that, I just want to have one more encounter. And this is the latest encounter I had just before this conference, okay? 16th of June, which was Wednesday. So, and this is what the Father said: Son, the restoration of all things agenda is the full expression of our heart for relationship with creation, and your passion is a reflection of our passion and fiery desire that all that we have created is restored. Now, he said to me, does mankind have the same passion for all that they've created? So I thought, well, I don't know. You know, what do you mean? You know, so you go back, you have this sort of conversation in your head with the Father, and you have this conversation. So he said the answer to that question will determine what happens in the end to what you know as demons, as they are the result of humanity's independence. Now, the question is asked a lot: fallen angels, demons, are they the same? Can they be redeemed? Can they be restored? All these things. And there's a lot of controversy out there. And my position on that, because the Father's never told me anything else, is that demons and fallen angels are different. Demons are the result of the dispossessed souls of those who died in the flood, who were not human, didn't have a human spirit, and therefore those are possessing people to work their agenda through people's lives on earth. And Jesus cast them out and they wandered around waste places. So that was my understanding. So my understanding was Jesus didn't create them. They can't be restored. Okay. Now, remember I said that God said that there are some things I've left incomplete and not done for you. So when I, went and engaged for the creation of one of the guardians, I had a conversation with God, which was somewhat accusatory to start with, in which I said, why didn't you make enough guardians? It's like, why didn't you make enough? And I was a little bit like, you should have made more. If there aren't enough to go around, why didn't you make more? And I was a little bit like, a bit bold, I guess. But I was, but in one sense, I couldn't understand. So I said, well, why didn't you make more? And because then he said, and then I sort of thought, oh, have they all fallen? Were enough, and then they've all fallen. And it was like, no. So then he said, there are some things which were left incomplete for you to do. So that means there are creative things within the dimensions of the universe that were left undone by the Father. So we, in our sonship and our maturity of sonship, would get to do. So creating guardians was one of them. Now, then I was like, oh, sorry, didn't mean to accuse you of not doing your job. Okay, I realized that there's some things. Now, when he said this to me, because those beings were a result of the Watcher angels coming and man agreeing with the Watcher angels and trading with the Watcher angels for knowledge, for the genetic material that it would require to create hybrids, which were the Nephilim, the men of renown, the demigods, the ones that in mythology were the gods, and all of that, giants on earth. And you read the book of Hebrews, you get all sorts of stuff, and you can do your research, you can find out a lot of stuff about that. So I was like, this hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like God dumped this on me a day before the conference. And I'm like, what do you mean? Does this mean that because we made those things, we have the right to judge what happens to those things? And if I have a passion for mankind, what mankind has created, as you have a passion for what you created, what is my loving response to those things, rather than my, I want them annihilated and destroyed response because they've done a lot of damage? Because with fallen angels, they've done a lot of damage, but I still love them and feel God's love for them. So I administrate that love to them and see them restored. So this opened up a whole other realm of possibility. Okay. So as our children are awakened to the truth of who we are, then humanity will be restored to mankind that was made in our image as we intended. So as we mature and become free, as humanity begins to rediscover its identity, the global consciousness of the mind of Christ will begin to choose love over hate, forgiveness over revenge and retribution, grace over law, mercy over judgment, union over division, covenant over competition, peace over conflict, family over tribalism. So everything that's resulted from mankind agreeing with Lucifer to follow the path of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the choices therefore that mankind has outworked, which have not been very good, let's face it, and have resulted in a lot of the destruction and devastation that has happened on the earth with wars and all sorts of things that have happened, then let me just go back and repeat what will happen when we come into a global consciousness in agreement with the mind of Christ as one mind. We will begin to choose love over hate. So how will that then apply to what we now call demons or anything or anybody else? We will begin to choose forgiveness over revenge and retribution. We will choose grace over law. We will choose mercy over judgment, union over division, covenant over competition, peace over conflict, family over tribalism, and begin to choose life over death and conservation and preservation over destruction and annihilation. Which is why I now believe that along with mankind's judgment of angels, and our judgment should be good, not bad. Therefore, we should be judging angels now good. And I judge the angels that are around me all the time, and I thank them. My judgment is thank you. Thank you for your involvement in my life. Thank you for what you're doing. Then I believe if we choose to come into agreement with God's desire and God's heart and what God is like, and we start to fully represent him as mankind rather than what we've been doing as humanity, then it is possible for what we have made to be fully restored to what our intention will be, because we made them. So that opens up all sorts of possibilities. No, I'm probably dumping this on you as well. Love will overcome, and mankind will truly reflect the fullness of our image, essence, nature, and character. Then all created sentient beings can be restored. Note, God said can be, because it's up to us what we choose to do. But I would suggest that we take a loving approach. And again, the Father said, we gave mankind the free will to choose, and they chose independence. But when all the darkness is flooded with light and restored, then mankind will have to choose again. So what are we going to choose the next time a choice is offered about whether we're going to operate in love or not? We will get to choose. This is what the Father was saying. When mankind has ascended to maturity, the choices made will not be independently made, but will be made in union and oneness with us, face to face, heart to heart, mind to mind. So what choice do you think we're going to make when joined in union with the Father? Love is predestined to win and overcome all things. And our desire is that all that we have created and will fully represent who we are as I am that I am. And that includes us. When mankind has ascended to creative fatherhood, everyone will fully understand what it is to be a responsible parent who loves unconditionally. Okay, so whatever that is going to lead us into, who knows? The restoration of all things is only the end of the beginning of the journey. The story will continue to go beyond. So let's have no limitations or restrictions. Okay, so in the short time we've got left, let's just engage with time. I believe it's important that any thoughts you have with time, maybe any agreements you've made negatively towards time, any agreement you have tethered yourself towards aging and death against the notion or the truth of immortality, just be open to that. So again, I would just encourage you right now to close your eyes, set the desire of your heart to engage with time. Father, we thank you. You created time for us. You created us to engage with time. We thank you that we have access to come and engage with this being that you have created to partner with us. So we step into that place where you have opened up for us right now to engage with time, that each of us would come to that place that we can access to engage with time. Now I'm engaging right now, and I can see others are engaging, and time is reiterating the statement, I am for you, not against you. I am for you, not against you. I wish to partner with you. Now, I would just encourage you to renounce and ask for forgiveness for anything that you've done to label time, to be negative about time, to think negatively, speak negatively, or act negatively, and just engage with time right now. Ask time to show you if there's anything that you need to just let go of, be tethered, disconnected to, from, with time, particularly aging, particularly with time and death, any untethering that needs to take place. Just be open. Just open your hearts, open your minds, and just engage time. Now, I encourage you just to make a positive affirmation of agreeing to come into a partnership with time for your own life, for your own restoration, for restoration connected to anything else and any other things, the able to use time correctly, to expand, to contract, to travel in time, to be used in time. Just set your desire, the desire you feel drawn to, and connect with time in that way. Reconnect, make that positive connection. Now, what I'm seeing is from time, a whole lot of filaments, like light filaments, that are going out from time, connecting to places and time in time and space. That as we engage with time, that we can travel to or along or engage with. That he's making available to us access, giving us access through him as a being and through time itself in the fullness of the understanding of it, giving us access for the restoration of all things. You may feel you want to connect and travel on one of those filaments to a point. It may be the Father wants you to go back to a point in your own history. It may be that he wants you to connect with another point in history, or maybe some other thing or place or dimensional reality. Just be open and see this as just the beginning, not the end, of a relationship that you are going to develop with time that is going to be very helpful for you in fulfilling your destiny and your mandates towards restoration and any other aspects that God has for you. This is a new dawn, a new day, a new relationship that you have with time, that you're going to look forward to life in a different way, because it's not connected to tomorrow's another day and I've lost a day and I'm an old day older. You know, disconnect yourself, be disconnected, untethered from the wrong relationship with time, and connect a true relationship with time. Time is your friend, not your enemy. Time is for you, not against you. Time partners with you in the fulfillment of your destiny. Feel free just to continue with that engagement. We're going to take a break now and we'll be back with the lovely Lindy in 3 o'clock.